Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lead Different podcast. We are here today with Rebecca Maestas-Sanchez. You know, Rebecca Maestas-Sanchez is a principal at St. Mary's Catholic School in Albuquerque, and I've got some history with that school. So she's already got a special place in my heart. She's an alumni of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, which is the overall school district that she belongs to. She graduated from Our Lady of the Annunciation and St. Pius X High School. And since 2007, she has served within the diocese and is now proudly leading St. Mary's Catholic School, a historic institution with over 100 years of legacy and history in educating New Mexico's children. She has a tremendous background. She has a bachelor's in elementary education from New Mexico Highlands University and a master's in educational leadership and administration from Creighton University. She is deeply committed to Catholic education, which she values for its Christ-centered classrooms, emphasis on virtuous behavior, and academic excellence. And her quote, I love this quote because it's one that I'm reading St. Augustine's Confessions now. She says, "Work as if everything depended on you, and pray as if everything depended on God." Wow, did we get all that right, Rebecca?
That was quite an introduction. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being on. And I know you go by Becky. So which do you want me to use during the interview?
Well, I typically only get called Rebecca when I'm in trouble. So Becky.
All right. Well, I will stop making you feel like you're in trouble and I'll call you Becky from now on. So thank you for being on the Lead Different podcast. You know, we met probably a couple of years ago. We met at your school, and I am very familiar with your school because my oldest daughter went to your school, and she is, gosh, I don't want to say how many years ago, but about 27 years ago, she was at St. Mary's School. My wife taught there. My wife went there. So my daughter graduated from there, and my wife's grandfather was in the first graduating class from St. Mary's way back in 1914, I believe.
Wow. Well, we were around then. So yeah.
Yeah, it is the oldest Catholic school in New Mexico, is it not?
No, actually the oldest Catholic school is San Felipe de Neri in our diocese.
That's right. That's right.
They're just a couple years older than we are. And so I always say, you know, if you didn't go to St. Mary's, you certainly know someone who did, because it is that school. For sure.
It is that school, and especially in the older age group when it was a high school, right? There were a lot of kids there, but you know, we're on a national and we're on a worldwide audience, so everybody's probably like, what are they talking about in Albuquerque? But so let me give you guys the reason Becky is on the podcast. So she is an elementary school principal who is doing some things different than a lot of elementary school principals. I had the pleasure of being invited to do a keynote for her and her fellow principals a couple of months ago, and that's how we met. And then Becky and I started talking, and I found that we had a lot of things in common. And one of the things that we have in common, and we'll get into her YOS later, is she's not afraid to try things that are unconventional and different. And she's not afraid to do things that are outside of the box. And I said, you know, I have a podcast, Becky. And what I would like to talk about on that podcast is how people are leading different. So that's what we're going to talk about. For if you're an educator, if you're a consultant or a coach that works with educators, I think you're going to get a lot of value out of the things that we're going to talk about with Becky today, how she's leading different, how she is doing some things in her school that other people aren't doing, and how it's helping her stand out from everyone else who does what she does. So is that okay for an agenda for today, Becky?
That works. Yeah, that works great. Yeah.
Well, let's get started. I'll start with the question that I like to ask. What made you? What attracted you to education, Becky?
Oh, well, I had children that were in school. I was a stay-at-home mom. Some of my kids were struggling in school at the time they were little, and I didn't quite understand why teachers were doing what they were doing. And I felt that I could do it differently, and in some cases do it better. And as parents, we know our kids best. And so that's kind of how I landed up in education. I started substitute teaching at my children's school. And it was one of those moments where I was following the lesson plan to the T, and I was losing the kids. They weren't engaged. They didn't like what we were doing. So I just changed it up on my own with no formal training whatsoever. And it worked. It was the aha moment that kids get. And for teachers, that is a big part of why we do what we do. We love that aha moment when a kid gets something for the first time and that you were responsible for making that happen. So that's what happened to me. And I'll never forget, I was substitute teaching in a 5th grade class. I came home and it was like, I want to be a teacher. I'm going to go to school to be a teacher. I had no college education whatsoever. I had 3 little kids. And so in January of 2001, I enrolled in my local university to begin getting a bachelor's degree in elementary ed.
So January 2001, that doesn't seem like that long ago, but it's 23 years ago, 23. Oh, it's going to be 24 years in a few weeks, right? So
Yeah.
you enrolled and you went and got your bachelor's in education.
Yeah, it wasn't quite that easy. I had 3 little kids, and then the month after I started school, I was pregnant with my 4th child. And so kind of did everything the hard way, but that's quite all right. That's sometimes how some of us have to operate. So took about 7 years, but finished college, graduated at the nice ripe age of about 41. And so that's
Well,
kind
I
of how it
love
started.
that. I love the thought of going to school at an older age. I got my MBA at 50 years old. So I know where you are now. I did have my bachelor's. I went the traditional route, but you did something really, really cool that I want to dig into. You had 3 little ones and then 1 on the way,
Mhm.
and it took you 7 years. What drove you? Because how old were your kids when you started? Your 3 that were born
Uh,
already.
oh my goodness, they were probably 4, 6, and 8. So they were pretty
Wow.
little.
High
Um,
maintenance.
yeah. Oh yeah. They need their mom. And they need their dad. And so, I have an incredibly supportive husband. So that's why I was able to go to school. And back
So
then there was no online school. There was correspondence courses. So I did a lot through correspondence so I could still stay home and be available for the kids.
4, 6, and 8, and 1 on the way, and that's when you started studying. So you were substitute teaching. Now, what school was this?
Gallup Catholic, and it doesn't
Wow.
exist anymore, but it's in Gallup, New Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you around the world that aren't familiar, Gallup, New Mexico is a small town on the western end of New Mexico, going into the Arizona border, and it is all by itself out there.
Literally, yeah.
And it's a very small town. Everyone knows everyone in Gallup, New Mexico. I bet if I told you some of the friends that I have who are from Gallup, you'd probably know them. But they're 4, 6, and 8. They're going to school. You're doing correspondence courses. Your husband is working. How did you make it work?
You got to be really organized. So, my husband was in a position at that time where he could control his call schedule. And so he would make sure that he was home at certain times so I could go to school on the nights that I went to class. And so, it was a gradual process for sure. It was not fast by any means. There were some semesters I would just take 1 class because due to the family schedule, I could only fit that in. But it worked through the support of each, my husband and and I thought it was real important for my kids to see their mom as a lifelong learner.
That is, I love that thought of, hey, you can get your bachelor's degree in your 40s, and you went and got your master's degree also.
Yes.
So why? You were already a teacher. You were
I was.
certified.
Yeah.
Tell me about obviously you're a lifelong learner. You talked about that love of education. So what made you say, you know what, I want to go get my master's degree?
I don't think I ever really set out to be a principal, but I will say that when you're in education, you see things that go a certain way and you're like, well, why do we do it that way? Why can't we do it differently? Has anybody ever thought about doing X, Y, and Z? And so that was kind of the motivation behind it and just the love of learning. So I was learning all these things in theory, but I couldn't apply them because I wasn't in a leadership role. And so that's kind of how I landed up into a principalship.
It's so funny. A lot of people would take that, right? A lot of, and I meet these people. We all meet them. They're frustrated because their leadership isn't doing things the right way or the way they would do them. but they just live with it. You took a different approach. You said, you know what, I'm going to go get a master's degree in educational leadership, right? I think it was educational leadership and administration from just a little known university like Creighton, right? You didn't shoot low. So you go to Creighton. Now, was that correspondence or online, or did you do that in person?
It was a hybrid model.
Excellent.
So there was some in person over the summers, and then during the school year online. And it was rigorous for sure. And it was, but I mean, I learned so much and was able to apply a lot of that, not just in the classroom, but also in my principalship.
And you were a lot younger than, I mentioned, I got my MBA at 50, and you forget how much of the learning process is those synapses. Kind of, you forget about the studying and the testing and the things you need to do. You were a little bit younger than I was when I did that, but you also probably had some different challenges because by then your kids were probably in their teens and some driving. And so you were dealing with different challenges. Yeah. What was different getting that bachelor's degree in the early 2000s versus when you got your master's degree when the kids were a little bit older?
Well, I think in both scenarios, because I was a non-traditional student and I was older, I was incredibly focused in both situations. But I was your age when I got my master's as well. So, but the difference, I guess, is that when you can apply what you're learning right then and there, that's really when learning takes place. And that's really effective learning. And that's what it was for me once I got my master's, is that I was able to apply what I was learning right there for the most part, and to see how systems were working and to see how to be able to apply that. When you're going to school to be a teacher, I wasn't in the classroom except as a sub. So I really couldn't apply everything I was learning in my undergrad because I really wasn't full-time employed. I was, just kind of subbing here and there. I was mostly a mom.
Interesting. So but I like that you said that, because in the same way, my at the time when I started my MBA program, I was leading teams in the medical device industry, and my MBA was in pharmaceutical marketing and management. And so I could take the stuff I learned and literally apply it right then and there. And you were able to do the same thing as you were doing that versus when you were getting your bachelor's. What led you to St. Mary's?
Oh, Jesus Christ, for sure. I never ever dreamed I would be a principal of a school like this. Never. And so this kind of came my way after I had just been out of school for a couple years, and I applied, and it was an instant connection with the interview team, and I think that was a big part of it. And then there was a lot of prayer associated with it too, because you always want to make sure that you're answering God's call, you're doing His work to glorify His kingdom, right? And is this really where you want me? So there's always those questions that I think people ask themselves, believers ask themselves when they're making employment changes or career changes. And so that's kind of how I landed up here at St. Mary's. And so it's been 6 years now, and it's gone by super fast. But it's been quite the ride, and it's been an incredibly rewarding journey to be here.
So I have to ask you this question, because you mentioned your motivation for wanting to get into education and eventually to get into leadership was you saw that there was a better way, right? There's got to be, why do we have to do it that way? And you saw yourself, and we're going to talk about your YOS, because our listeners, a lot of them are coaches who are familiar with the YOS discovery. So they're going to want to know what your Y operating system is. So we'll tell them that later. But what have you found is harder than you thought it might be? Because, a lot of us, I'll tell you, my leadership experience, I always said, well, if I was there, I would do things differently. And then you get there and you're like, holy crap, it's a lot harder to do things differently than it looked like when I was being led by those people. What's the biggest reality check you got when you became an administrator and you had the power to make those decisions? Were you able to implement the changes that you saw were necessary when you were in the trenches and following maybe some guidance that you didn't think was so great? And what was the biggest thing you were able to change? Tell us that. And what was the one thing that you found was really hard to change and you had to really work at it?